Good morning, Brother Samori.
Morning, Brother Brown. How are you?
I'm doing marvelous and wonderful. I've been looking forward to doing this interview with you because I think you're doing extremely critical work in teaching uh, Black families how to home study their children.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of parents would be really afraid to undertake home studies because they themselves are not that up on subject matter and everything. Now, and I want you to talk about it, but they may feel confident, say, in doing some African studies. But in terms of other subject matter, they like, hey, I don't know math myself. So let's
Right.
talk about home studying. What are the pros and cons?
Well, number one, to deal with the issue of parents being afraid of homeschooling their children in certain topics because they are not necessarily versed in those topics. I would say, man, leave that, leave that alone because as a homeschooler, you don't have to be an expert in every subject, for you to be an effective homeschooler, for your children. I mean, sure, okay, or the African history side, you can do that. You can do, maybe teach them how to write. But as you just said, maybe you're not that versed in mathematics and science and all those kind of things. But that's fine because in a homeschooling environment, especially if we're not trying to do it like the Eurocentric Eurocentric model of education where you have to be a sage on stage, standing in front of your children all day, talking to them or quote unquote teaching them particular concepts, then you'll be okay because in many homeschooling settings, or I kind of teach the parents to be a guide on the side. They don't need a sage on the stage. They need somebody to work with them, and like a good coach. Right? Let's say if you are a football coach or a basketball coach, that football coach is probably not the best person to catch the ball, to teach you how to throw the ball and all these different things. But that coach can put the resources around you to help you grow in that particular endeavor in the game. So it's the same thing with homeschool parents. You don't have to be great in science and math and in every subject to be able to help your children do those things very well for themselves. There's a lot of resources, you know, online and different places to help you teach children those things. It takes a village. Nobody has to be great at everything. Now the question becomes, why weren't you good at math? Why weren't you good at science? Why weren't you good at these particular subjects when we understand that African people gave the world science and mathematics and gave the world language and writing, right? And so it's probably the way that you have been taught in schools. And in many ways, we have forgotten much of the things that we have been taught in schools because it just was boring. It was irrelevant, right? And so we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking about homeschooling our own children. Maybe we should be teaching them the boring and irrelevant parts that we fail to even learn ourselves. So the pros and cons of homeschooling, I think the pro is that you can teach your children through their interests. I think a pro is that your children can really grow at their own pace. And in many of the public school systems that we learn in at this moment, number one, no one ever asks them what they want to learn about, and number two, it's not self-paced. So you got to get it right now, and if you don't get it, well, you're going to be left behind. And Dr. Amos Wilson teaches us that in many ways we are killed in the public school system by the time system alone. If you don't get it this time, now you're learning disabled, or you have a learning disability. And in the homeschooling situation, you have time to really, really, go at your own pace. All of our seeds grow at their own pace anyway. So those two are very good pros of homeschooling, but also we can focus on our children understanding who they are, understanding their own purpose, understanding their own story, in terms of our story as African people, but also we can focus on what we need to do and the kind of people we need to be in order to solve the problems that we have as a community. And we're definitely not going to get that any other kind of educational environment. You know, that environment must teach us how to solve our own problems, and we can do that in our own homes. In terms of cons, I really don't see any cons to homeschooling. One of the things that people come up with is say, well, what about socialization? What about, you know, the children dealing with other children? Again, if you are homeschooling your children, and if you understand that the world is our classroom, your children will never be alone. Now, your children don't have to be around 20 other children who are the same age. That is not real socialization. That's very, very artificial, and that's the thing that the public school system does. Is, you know, it puts us around all the other children who are 6, as if that's the real world. There's no other time outside of school where you'll be around everybody else just because they were, you know, born around the same time that you were born. You know, you will be around people with the same interests. You'll be around people with the same, you know, a job and all those kind of different things, but it won't be based upon age. And we find that homeschoolers are definitely being, you know, they have the opportunity to socialize with people. Homeschooling is not just about being stuck in a home, right? It's about the world being our classroom and getting out and being communal with other folks outside of your family. So there's a quote unquote pros and cons of homeschooling.
I'd just like to add, throw this into the mix for parents to think about, and that is when you send your children to public school, we don't think of the negative devastation that has happened to them. And it's true. In some of these schools, our children do excel and they do well. But there is a cost to that in the sense that regular school in the American school system does not teach African history. Therefore, and the history that they do teach is primarily a distorted, misguided European history in the sense that they focus that Greece is the foundation of democracy and Greece is the foundation of everything. And white folk invented everything. And black folk really didn't invent anything. And they certainly didn't invent civilization. So black children do not get a really positive sense of themselves or their people in regular schooling, and that's designed. But yet they excel a great deal, even with all the negatives. But what would they be if they got a full insight to who they really are and what their people have done and how the world really depends on the African people and on African resources and leadership?
Absolutely. That's one of the. Now you say the cons of the public food system. We can go all day on that particular topic, and one of the ones that you just talked about is that our children don't see themselves in the curriculum. You know, or if they see themselves. All right, so you know, we're talking about some of the cons of the public school system, and we can go all day on the fact that our children do not see themselves in the curriculum. It's very powerful for people to see themselves in a curriculum. I used to use the idea that, you know, if you get tagged on a picture in Facebook or whatever, the first thing you're going to go and do when you get to the page is to look for yourself in that picture, right? And if you're not in that picture, the picture becomes a little bit less relevant. I mean, we're egotistical in that way. We always try to find ourselves and see where we are. Right. And so our children want to find themselves and see where they are in the curriculum as well. And that is, if we're not there, or it's very, very minimal, then, in many ways we check out, right? And it's been happening over and over and over and over again. And you have to ask the question: if a child does not see themselves in the curriculum, and they still excel in that particular endeavor, that at what cost? As you already talked about, right? And at the cost of miseducation, diseducation, the cost of being very useless to African people. Right? We have more people with PhDs, more people with masters, more people with bachelors, and even high school diplomas than we probably ever had. Right? But we still have many of the same issues that we have in our community, and we have a lot of the people who are the smartest among us, who are, or again, of no use to us, because since they did not see themselves in the curriculum and they imbibed all of that Eurocentric nonsense, they in many ways see themselves, or see us, through those European eyes, right? The European eyes don't see African people in a very positive way. The people who get the most education within that system would not see themselves in the most positive light. So you're talking about people who are not going to help African people do anything when they do have the skills to maybe help us. So now, on the flip side of that, what if our children did really, really understand who we are and where we came from and what we have done, and the shoulders upon which they stand, and also the reality of what we must continue to do to get to where we need to be, and that will be something totally different. And the beauty of an African-centered homeschooling environment is that we can make that happen every day. Every day our children are getting an education, not only for a living, to make a living, to get the skills to make a living, but they also get an education for life, and a life as an African person, the life of an African person who understands, their value to the world, who understands their value to the community, who understands what their personal skills and talents are, so that they can use them for the betterment of their community. That's a different kind of education that must be brought to the table, for our children. And it's a great time to be able to do so when we start to homeschool our children. And you talk about another con of the public food system. Think about all the microaggressions that our children have to deal with in those schools. And sometimes people say to us, like, well, yeah, we don't need no African-centered education. We can just send them to those folks who don't treat us right. How can they teach us right? We'll just send them to those folks who obviously don't know anything about us, who don't have any expectations of what we really can do. We'll just send them to those folks, and then we'll teach them ourselves once they get home. But the reality is, when you send your children to the public school system, I mean, how often do you even have with them? How much time do you have with them? I mean, you maybe wake them up in the morning and maybe get them some breakfast. That's an hour, maybe, and you send them off to somebody else to be educated and to be reared and raised for 7-8 hours. And then they come home, and then they still monopolize your time by giving your children however much homework. So they're still there with you. And then maybe you get them dinner and they're off to bed. So who's really raising your children? And how many things happen at school that are very detrimental to the psyche, detrimental to the self-esteem of the African child that we don't even know about. And you can just ask your child what happened at school today, and your child would not be able to really express some of the things that can be very, very damaging to them in a long-term sense.
Samori, this is probably an opportunity for African people to have one of the greatest revolutions in terms of learning since we were taken out of Africa. I see this as a great benefit, because if you look at what we did coming out of slavery during those 15 years, it's written in the congressional record by the congressman on the tip of my tongue. But what he said was that Black people, he was talking about Booker T. Washington, really, and Tuskegee, and how Tuskegee was not preparing black folk to be servants to white people or even to work with them necessarily, but they were learning so fast because each one reached one, each one taught one, that we accumulated a greater sense of learning through that method than any people in human history. In the 14, 15 years after emancipation, we had went from like what 1 or 2% literacy to almost 60, 65% literacy. And we did that on our own primarily. Each one we reach one, each one teach one. This is a revolution in which black people have an opportunity to re-educate themselves, to refocus on taking our place in the world. Because if you don't know math and you don't know these subject matters, now is the time to learn while you're teaching. I find the best ways of learning is to start with books that the kids would learn at kindergarten. Start from A. Start,
Absolutely.
grab a start and learn with them and make an entertainment. And once you begin to see how much joy you get out of reading books and so forth, we turn around as a people. We can come back a lot of the negative behavior of our young people simply by learning and studying and focusing on our liberation together in the home. This is really blessing, and you have talked about it, but you're right, we could go on all day long talking about the positive, but I'd like for you to accent uh, how we can bring other, because you got the internet and you have to monitor it, but still every subject matter that you can think of is on the internet, even though you may have to
Right.
monitor it. But I don't care what it is you want to do, there's lessons there. I mean, information is everywhere. And tell us about forming groups, home study groups, and the benefit of that in terms of you don't have to be together all the time, but you need to come together. And another subject I'm going to ask you, um, that is the controlling forces will want to come back. Black folk doing home studies, so they're going to put a lot of regulations that you still have to pass certain criteria in order to get promoted or graduated and so forth. Speak to that. Speak to the subject matter that I lifted up. If you can remember, I admit I'm going on a lot. Yeah, bro.
No, I got you, brother. I got you. This is absolutely a revolution in terms of our ability, the possibility of us really coming together and schooling our children. Right? This has definitely been a blessing in disguise. I've had so many people call me over the last few months, just saying basically, hey, I've been thinking about doing this a long time, and now is the time, for me to do it. And they've been calling for help in many ways, right? This is time to start those cooperatives, those homeschooling cooperatives. Time to get together with your neighbor, with the people in your community, and to say, and again, listen, if you don't understand the math, maybe you have a neighbor that does. If you're not big on the history, maybe you have a friend who is big on the history, and you get together. It doesn't have to be every day, of course. With the internet, there's all kinds of ways to to come together. All right, but it can be, okay, just on Wednesdays, guys, we're gonna get together and we're gonna do something collectively with our children, right? So you want that socialization, okay? Bring that to the table, right? But on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, you do your thing. Or maybe you want to come together every day. Maybe you want to come together just, a couple days a week, or even just a couple days a month. We can do it together when we, pool our resources, when we bring our ideas together for our children. It's happening all over the world. It's happening all over the country where people be to. So there's a new word now. We're not calling necessarily cooperatives anymore. We're calling them homeschooling pods, where people are saying, "Hey, we're going to get together in a small group and educate our children." Now, that would really, really be that revolution, man. And but one of the things that will hamper that revolution is the fact that, yes, we might get together, but then so many folks go right back into the Eurocentric kind of curriculum, the Eurocentric kind of structure and model of education, because that's all they know. Right. So it's my job, and it's the job of others, to kind of help people understand what it means to do something different, what it means to do something that's African centered and not the Eurocentric common core kind of standards that they already have out there, but an African core, have our own African standards, making sure that we educate our children, of course, academically, but also spiritually and morally as well, in terms of what they need to be knowing in our school. So yeah, it's happening. I hope it happens a lot more. I hope we are able to go back and study, as you said, not only study with our children, because that's one of the best ways for them to learn, is to see their parents, their guardians learning as well, but also study really where we come from, and how the traditional African education happened, right? And take what was great about that old model and bringing it into today, and moving it forward. Because the reality is, 65% of the jobs that our children have in the future have not even been invented yet. So, gone are the days that we can just say, "I'm trying to help you learn so you can become this particular thing." When the reality is, we don't even know what that, what those jobs are going to be. So we want to educate our children from an African-centered perspective to be able to do whatever.
The great opportunities that home studying provide. While you were talking, I thought of a couple of things that I wanted to throw in there. I'll throw them in, and maybe it will restart you.
Okay.
That is like families can get together and go on trips together. I mean, if somebody got a van, or if you got a few cars, or even if you want to do a big thing, which is what my family do, we have family reunion every year. But last year we went to the African American Museum. I mean, you can do outings, and that was one of the most fantastic trips. Not that the African American Museum holds presents all of our history. It doesn't present 10% of it, but it's a good outing together. And what you see is fantastic, even though it's only a small percent. But we can create adventurous things that we can do together. And especially if you want to do family reunion, and bring your family together and go on these trips and make home study just a colossal thing. It can be business. I mean, we can come together with just so many opportunities by educating ourselves. But I had asked you in terms of the system and the kinds of roadblocks that they're going to throw up to make sure that they control home studies and so forth. And those, have you thought of those and ways of dealing with it?
Homeschooling is legal in every state in the United States of America, right? And different states have different levels of laws that govern homeschooling. Now, in some states, you can, at the end of the year, you have to send in standardized test scores. But even in that one state, you might even have an option to just send in a portfolio of work that your child has done over the years or over the year, right? Or you can send a letter from a certified teacher saying that yes, your child is performing and progressing in a satisfactory manner in the curriculum that you are giving them. So there's opportunities here. I think there's less resistance to homeschooling because so many other people are doing it, and so many other people started doing it maybe before we started. So I don't think there's a whole bunch of real oversight over this thing, man. We can do exactly what we need to do, teach our children exactly what we need to teach them, and do what we have to do to educate our children for liberation instead of the subordination that we are so used to receiving in the public food system and the private food system and the charter food system, right? And so, yes, they're not going to approve us in terms of sometimes the curriculum, but there are ways around, those particular situations as well. So it can be done. It is being done. People are educating their children from an African-centered perspective. It's all about whether or not we want to do it. It's all about whether or not we are fearless and courageous enough to take that step and really, really educate our children, from a different perspective. And so that's really what it comes down to, Bobby Brown. I don't think it's less about the laws and those things like that. It's about whether or not we are ready. Too often, many of us are still looking for the accreditation and the approval of other people to educate our children for liberation. And that's just not going to happen. If we go to them and say, hey, can I really teach my children how to overthrow you and take away your power? Of course, they're going to say, I don't know about that. So we have to do our own thing.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, Betsy DeVore, who is was she Secretary of Education, whatever, but she's in charge. And they have models for private schools, to privatize schools, because there's tremendous budget there, tremendous amount of money in privatizing homeschooling. What if you're homeschooling? What happens to the money that your children would get if they were going to either public schools or these private institutions, which will get all of this money? See, the focus is to privatize schooling so that they get the billions, even trillions of dollars nationally that would go to education.
Right. So, Barbara Brown, there's some groups who are trying to make sure that the money that your child would have had, in the public school system, in the charter school system, will follow you, into your homeschooling endeavor. I have not found that has been the case, though. I have not found that that's been the case. And it's one of the cons that many people would say as well. Listen, my tax dollars go to the public school system, so that's why I send my child to the schools. And if I take my child out, I want my monies to come with me. But at this moment, that is not happening. That's not happening. Like, people are not necessarily getting the money, the thousands of dollars that each child gets. In October, that's when they kind of start counting up and say, okay, how many children you got in your school? How many people are enrolled? Okay, boom. We're going to base the money that you're going to get for the year off of those numbers in October. And we see so many of our young brothers in particular who are kicked out of school right after those numbers are sent into the state, because now they have received the money for them, and now they can just get rid of them. All right. But in homeschooling, listen, we're going to have to tax ourselves again. Again, nobody's going to give us the approval to do what we have to do. It might seem unfair that you're not getting the money that's coming from the state, for your child. But again, he who butters your bread has an effect on your stomach, is African wisdom that I live by. Again, he who butters your bread has an effect on your stomach. So if those folks are going to send that money with your child into your homeschooling environment, your homeschooling cooperative, then they're going to want to have a great deal of say on what you are teaching your child. They're going to want to have a great deal of say of the curriculum, even the pedagogy, the standardized testing and assessments that you'll have to give your child at the end of the year if they are giving you that money.
Yes, I understand. I'm going to ask you one other question, and that is now, give us a little bit on your background and your travel in Africa and your work in Africa, and how homeschooling uh, can promote Africa, a relationship between Africans and a knowledge of the kind of economic development that we need to be involved with in order to become one with our brothers and sisters in Africa and even return, and your impact with homeschooling in Africa, or at least teaching the way you have been teaching in Africa.
So yes, I've been to about 9 African countries over the last 7 years, and I moved to Ghana for 4 years there. Lived in Accra, and while I was there, even before I went there, I understood that there was no such thing as African-centered education in in Ghana. And it, you know, it really bothered me. But when you understand colonialism and you understand the colonialism, the neo-colonialism that still goes on there, that's still happening right now in terms of the educational system and the economic system that's there, you understand why that is, why they don't have African-centered education. But I did get with a couple folks, Dr. Obadale Cambone and his wife, Cambone as well, to start an educational institution, to start an African Center school. The African Center school is called Abibi Fahodie Adesuya Bia, which means African Liberation School. And we did so with the idea that we would, you know, begin to really re-educate and kind of, you know, turn around that miseducation that many of our African brothers and sisters get on the continent, and educate our people. We found that it was more difficult to try to get the local Ghanaians to come to the school. The vast majority of the people that were at the school were people who were, you know, like myself and the Cambones, repatriates, people coming from the Caribbean, coming from the U.S., coming from the U.K. and like that. But the education, if you know anything about the Kamal, the Cambones, you know, Badale Cambone and Kala Cambone, you know that they are very serious Africans when it comes to the education of our children. And we find that when the local, you know, Ghanaians, the African people begin to learn our story, then it takes their consciousness to another level. And we have people who are traveling in, who are coming in to take their pilgrimage to Ghana, to go to the dungeons at Elmina and whatnot in Cape Coast. You know, we find that they get, you know, some inspiration as well when they come over to the school and see the kind of Pan-African, the kind of education, that kind of African-centered education that we're giving or providing the students in the school. And of course, Obadale Cambone and his family have taken that kind of education online as well, with Abibi Tumikasa, as well as, you know, of course, what we do with Kamali Academy. We're trying to reach our brothers and sisters no matter where we are in the world. Now, when we talk about the benefit of that kind of education, number one is that we begin to see ourselves as African people. We begin to see ourselves as African people, not just as Ghanaians, not just as Nigerians, not just as Kenyans, but as African people as one. And if we understand ourselves as one, and that's what the education should do, and African-centered education should help us understand that, then we understand that we don't need anything from anybody else. We don't need any resources from anybody else. We don't need anybody's economic advice, right? We can do it for ourselves, and it brings us together from all walks of life, from all corners of the earth, as we come together and as we met in Ghana to do this thing on a different level, man. So African-centered education on the continent, it's not really happening as much as it should be, but we're beginning to plant those seeds, and we see other people who are now traveling to Ghana and repatriating and whatnot, are also trying to develop those kind of homeschooling cooperatives that teach us from an African-centered perspective, and they're doing great work in Kenya as well. They had a big court case just recently, just early this year, late last year, where the group is called HEAD, HEAD, and you can find them on Facebook and whatnot. They are doing great work out there in Kenya, winning the right to be able to homeschool their children from an African-centered perspective as well.
Oh man, I appreciate your work. I am delighted to have this opportunity to interface with you, and I give you not only my prayers, but my will and strength and love that your work prospers and you prosperous and your family and your wife, so that we can grow. But most of all, man, I just appreciate the dedication and the work you're doing. You're a real hero. You are a real hero.
Robert Brown, appreciate that, brother.
Yeah. So I look forward to talking to you again. There are a lot of other questions, but hopefully we can get together again. You make a promise?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm gonna hold you to it.
Listen, this is Transatlantic Productions, man. I have grown up watching, the videos of the John Henry Clarks and the Dr. Amos Wilsons and the Leonard Jeffries and all those folks that you have provided for the people, man, free of charge. The knowledge that this particular platform gives to the world is beautiful, and it must be spread.
Oh man, I thank you. All right, I'm gonna let you go and look forward to another session with you soon.
Absolutely, Baba. Thank you so much.
Peace. All right now.
Tapvideo, man. Transatlantic Productions, the place to get all your knowledge and wisdom straight from the mouths of some of our greatest teachers.